All right, Wes. What was the thing you found most encouraging as you studied and wrote this sermon from the text?
I was just super encouraged in the verse 19 of just how God uses prayer and to bring about His purposes, and because that was just something as I was, trying to say in the teaching, that I didn't want to just skip over that part, because we can just talk about Paul's life and Paul's work and ministry, but just the importance of prayer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sinan? What did you find most encouraging about that sermon?
Yeah, I was going to say that what you said about prayer was encouraging to me and helpful personally. So when you're playing the superstitious view of prayer against recognizing your audience, the one you pray to, that was instructive and helpful.
Good. Baxter?
I also was going to say the first point, the prayer, but I wrote down another one, which was, I was encouraged by you fleshing out to live as Christ, to die as gain. You had the Jonathan Edwards quote, you had the in Christ alone, just supplying it with a fuller picture of that verse. Or I guess the Jonathan Edwards was actually from prayer, but in Christ alone, just supplying a fuller picture, because it's a common verse, but I think the way you expanded on it was encouraging.
Okay.
So I was encouraged that from the outset I felt two things. First, that you truly believed what you were about to preach, but even more so that you really wanted us to pay attention and believe what you were saying. Like you communicated that you cared about the audience. So that was really encouraging to me. I was like, I think he wants me on the same page as him.
Yeah.
So
Good. Josue?
Yeah, I agree with almost all of that, because I wrote it down. Like, life of prayer is what shows a commitment with Christ. So he was saying, you're not gonna change the things. God is gonna put you to pray, basically. So it was given like a theology of prayer, and that prayer is powerful because not because I pray a lot, but because of the God to whom I pray.
Right, okay.
So,
Good?
Yeah, I found it encouraging when you emphasize that God wasn't just using people like Paul, apostles, but He's using the ordinary person. So I thought that was really encouraging to me myself.
Yeah, I thought that was also encouraging. Is like God uses all kinds of people to get this stuff done. So it was very clear that you weren't saying that as some kind of just like throwaway, but you actually believed it. So it gets back to Eric's thing of like, I was like, oh yeah, he probably means me too. Good. What's the one thing that you think you just like missed on? Either you meant to do it, or you like forgot to do it, or just like I tried to do it, and it didn't work.
Yeah, I was really wanting to, even though preaching to a Christian audience, just, even so bringing it to the gospel, bringing it back to Christ, and trying to do that at the end, I just feel like could have been done better.
Okay. All right. Sinan?
Yeah, I was going to say that, so I'll say it.
Tell it. Say it. But just like, what would you say about it?
So I was going to say, how does the gospel propel your argument forward of glorifying Christ? So that was a question I was going to ask. But since you're aware of that was the thing you were trying to do and didn't quite get to, I'm happy to leave it at that. I felt there were moments where you were quick on things, and I kind of missed what you were saying, because it's good, I'm trying to write it, and I'm trying to track as well.
Yeah.
So if you employed a little bit of, it's such a hard thing to know where to slow down, especially when you're giving your points, and you're transitioning into certain points. Just slow down so we can track with you, because you've sped a bit in the main. and sustain that that kind of pace, and then you kind of don't slow down so we're with you. So maybe that's something.
Yep. Good, Baxter?
On that front, the idea of your argument, like what, if someone asked me what was Wes arguing, I think I would nail it down with like your title and the 3 points, a Christ glorified life looks like this, boom, boom, boom. But you did mention an aim at the beginning, and I could not, it was pretty long, and I could not get it all down, and then it felt like we never got back to that explicitly, and so I was never reminded of it throughout, so it felt like it was put out there too quickly and then never returned to for the listener.
Yep. Okay.
So to make that point, I'll repeat it, because you'll hear me say, probably one of my main critiques in these labs are, we know what to be listening for, so I always write down like title, main point, outline. I'm ready to go, so that when you say it, all I have to do is jot it down. And even though I was ready, I missed your main point.
Yeah.
And in some sense, if I miss your main point, I miss everything, because then I'm trying to piece it together as we go out, as we go through the sermon. So essentially what I'd say is like, I'd rather you say your main point 10 times and us be like, all right, dude, we got it, than
Right.
for you to say it once, we miss it, and we miss the whole
Right.
sermon. So,
And it had to have been, like, how many words is
a
your
ton.
main point? Like at least 20.
The way to honor Christ.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
To live in such a pursuit of following and serving Christ and his people, even the worst outcomes gained.
Yeah.
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 So like I got the same thing. I got as far as Baxter. The way to honor Christ in our lives is.
Yeah.
I was lost from there.
all I got was the way to honor Christ.
Okay.
And that's not just main point too, that's outline,
Yeah.
that's got big, important sentences, just try to repeat.
Yep.
I mean, they said it, I wrote down the same things, like, I wasn't clear of what was the argument.
Okay.
He mentioned it, it was really fast, and he had it clear, so,
Right.
he had it clear, but I wasn't able, I thought maybe it's me because at the same time I'm trying to take notes. So I would say the main point and also the structure. So the structure was clear, you can take a lot of things that you can learn from what he was saying, it was good, but I wasn't clear on what are we talking about, like,
Okay.
I can understand the
Yeah.
text.
Okay.
Other than like speak slower, just in general, I found that although I was really encouraged by the prayer point, it wasn't like, I feel like even though you could focus on it, I just don't think it was one of the biggest focuses, and you used a lot of time in your sermon focusing on that as well. So I guess just, focusing on it as much as the author focuses on it.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So because, to kind of play off a couple of these points, because I wasn't clear on what your argument was, and the way you were walking through, particularly like what I ended up figuring out was your second point, it felt much more like a multi-topic sermon or a running commentary, because you just moved like from this verse to this verse. You did have homiletical points, but once you were in there, it was just like, now I'm just gonna march. And I've got a little bit of something, so the thing on prayer was like solid, but it sounded like a systematic theology of prayer. Because I didn't know where you were headed, but then also just the way you were, you were kind of like, now I've said that about that, now we move on to the next thing, So even though you had 3 points, that second point was essentially like 5 or 6 sub-points, where it didn't feel like cohesive, like, oh, he's trying to drive towards this one thing.
Yeah.
It tried to feel like you were going like a lot of different places. Get in?
So you had a line which I've been having for, it jumped out at me because I've been having for it. So you said, remember the whole imperial guard. And at that point I was like, is it me or you haven't told us a thing about the imperial guard prior to that statement. And that's something to watch out for if you're going to say something like that. Remember the whole imperial guard, and then you talk about it, but you said remember, and then you just moved on.
Right.
So your audience might not know that information.
Yep.
Unless they,
That's good.
we may.
I did read that verse earlier in the beginning.
Yeah, but to explain to your
Yeah.
audience what you're talking about, what does that mean?
Right. Even if it's just a sentence or two.
Just one sentence.
But as you'll all catch on, like, the biggest pet peeve I have in the world is, as you know,
Yeah.
or you'll of course remember
Yeah.
sentences.
Well, remember.
Like, why would you ever assume that we remembered or knew about it? And then even if we do, like, there's not a lot of benefit, 'cause what part of that are you talking about? So just tell us what you're gonna talk about, and you can move on. Baxter?
Just the lab context was something that was missed, preaching to leaders or pastors. I felt like it was a general Sunday service. I mean, it was definitely focused more to believers,
Yeah.
but I don't think it didn't seem especially tailored towards leaders and towards pastors. So I just wonder how this would preach differently to that context. And I think it was actually more focused towards the average person, the ordinary person, like Nathan talked about, and even some points. It's not just for leaders; it's it's for everybody. So I wonder, given we're focusing this term on a context towards pastors or ministry leaders, how that might influence the output of your sermon.
Okay. Eric?
So my brother and I like to make fun of each other when we're driving if we come to too abrupt of a stop, because it's like, dang, I got like whiplash. You know, like a smooth coming to an end is always nice when you're riding in a car.
Mhm.
And I think the same is for sermons. I just felt like you just like ended, you're like, let's pray. I was like, whoa, oh, we're done? Okay. So I don't know if it's just like slowing down as you're nearing the end, or if you have like a super strong last line where it's like, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, a way to live this Christ-honoring life. Just wrap it up real nicely is what I'd say. And help us come to a smoother end.
Good. Well,
Maybe like extending on the introduction, that will be really helpful to also give a good foundation to develop later. So if you could spend a little bit more time explaining what you're gonna talk about before, that will help you then to have the attention of the people, and then develop what you introduce in the beginning.
yeah. Okay.
I didn't think it was totally necessary to mention God's sovereignty when it came to the prayer, cause if you're just explaining this to people, you could kinda just hit the main point of why you pray and why that's effective. The whole aside with, hey, God is sovereign, still works through that, I just didn't think it was totally necessary.
Yeah, so it took us out of what you were trying to argue for. The only other thing I would say is, you jumped around a ton in Philippians, in kind of the Bible in general. So it got really kind of like similar to Eric's point, like you feel whiplash where you're just like, now we're going over here, and we're going over there, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. And so some of that, of course, is like good, but it can go so much that it was essentially like, well, are you actually preaching this passage? Or are you just pulling all these things in to explain the things that are in this passage that you want to talk about, right? Instead of just like laying this thing out. So it doesn't mean that like you'll never go outside your passage, but it was just like we'd be in and then we'd be out. We'd be in and we'd be back out. So it felt just kind of like discombobulating. What do you think you did? You attempted to do, and you're like, all right, I made it down the field on this. Did a decent job with this.
I think, in just sort of the summary of the message of the title, the Christ glorifying life, and just hitting on 3 markers of that, highlights of that really stick with people, and so sort of with that, I feel like maybe the way I worded my aim could have been more aligned with that direction of that.
Okay, sit in. What did you do well?
I thought you had some good lines throughout. So the one that struck me personally was that Jesus is a full pursuit of Paul's life, and that just, I was like, yeah. I was wanting you to slow down and just tease that out. You know? So kudos for that. Well done.
Baxter?
Yeah, one thing I wrote down was Wes, this sermon clearly hit your heart before it hit ours, similar to Eric's point at the beginning, but I thought that was the, maybe best feature of the sermon, was just how it came across, notwithstanding the things we've talked about, but I felt, that you truly had spent time with this text and you had something to preach to us, and that came across very, very well.
Good.
Yeah, in terms of like first sermons that I've heard at the Chicago course, I think that this is honestly one of the better ones I've heard. Especially as I think about some of the moves you made, getting from quotations to New Testament citations. You had like different things. I was like, that was a nice move. But especially your use of rhetorical questions in terms of application. You killed it on some of those questions. They were like very direct. They were scattered throughout, and I was like, let's go, Wes. Veteran move.
That's right.
His confidence on, for example, giving some practical things for believers that were in the passage, that were actually in the passage. Like, for example, the progress of other believers. So that is encouraging to apply. So there were a lot of practical things that a believer has to do, and that are in the text. Right? So that was
Good.
Yeah, I thought how you focused on death and how we are to see it differently. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest points of this passage. I thought you teased that out well and focused on it. I thought that was helpful and really good.
Yeah, I thought that you had multiple angles of application when it came to believers in this passage. So it wasn't just like, be like Paul. It was like, so, just prayer mark your life, passion is evident in what you love, and, this whole idea with the Christ alone thing. God uses ordinary people. So there's just these multiple different ways you were speaking to believers, which I thought was helpful. It wasn't just like hitting on the same thing over and over again. Yep.
Do you want to come back to?
Okay, back to.
I did feel like you were concerned for the listener to understand the context. Just general Philippians context. I know we talk about bouncing around a lot, but your concern for the listener to grasp the context and how it informs the text came across. So I think that was a really good feature, is to have that concern.
Eric.
So in terms of like your physical presence up there, I thought you had a pretty good, comfortable pulpit presence, especially towards the end. Felt like you were comfortable up there.
Good. Josue?
You also said something about the understanding of the world, how the world can see how possible Christians see death as gain. So that also, can be enlightening for believers, but also for non-believers. So that's good.
Yeah.
I thought your sports analogy was super personable, super relatable. Everybody, I definitely was able to understand it well and relate to it, and I thought that was a super good use to prove that point. I just thought it was really well done.
Good. Isn't it?
Yeah, I found it. So I agree with Jeremy. You did go to a lot of places, but that portion where you were trying to establish your text in context at the beginning was helpful. You might have wanted to make it shorter, but to try and place, it's a great move to try and place your passage in context.
Yeah.
And that was
I remember one too, like the illustrations were good, like that was helpful also to understand the passage when he talked about sports and the passion Apostle Paul has also for Christ.
Right.
As he said, it's silly, but it's helpful.
Yeah.
And he also showed that passion as well for from Christ. So
Mhm.
that is what you wanna see when you hear it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I would say lastly, that, what was helpful was that all the things withstanding of like, you know, it could have been clear when it came to your homiletical points, you could have kept, like, you could have repeated them more and stuff like that. They did all kind of hang together around your title.
Yep, yeah.
So as these things that are like, are starting to click into place, right, these are things that like, you know, are hard to pick up. Once you can then pick up on them and then you learn how to wield them well, they'll do a lot of work to like actually carry us along. And so those pieces are there. So it'll be fun to see how those things continue to grow and develop as we progress. Done.
Well done.
Alright, that's what-